Good morning, this is Larry Cedar. I'm back with you today for another session on scanning. Scanning is a technique which utilizes the incremental release of muscular tension to achieve a deep state of physical, emotional, and mental calm. It is October 9th. It is just after 5 o'clock in the morning. And let's just get started. Again, I just want to say scanning is the incremental release of muscular tension. Make a fist and release. The incremental release of muscular tension to achieve a deep state of physical, emotional, and mental calm. Something we all could benefit from at least once or twice, 3 times a day to bring our lives into balance. And we'll go into that in greater detail in a moment. But we start with the preliminary steps, which are deep breaths, followed by stillness and silence. And in brief, what we're doing in scanning is we are expanding. In life, you are either contracting or expanding. Those are the 2 basic states of our existence. Everything is either in a state of contraction or expansion or vacillating between the 2. We spend a lot of our day contracting, thinking, working, doing, creating, building. We also need to do the same amount of the opposite: expansion, relax, let go, release, accept. When you do that, you reach a state of balance or centered. So scanning is a way to bring yourself back into balance. We always have to go back to contraction. That's our life. That's doing things, working, having relationships, speaking, thinking, writing. But in order to achieve balance in our lives, which sometimes we lose, we get out of balance, we need to practice the opposite, which is expansion. So we start with deep breaths and stillness and silence. Deep breaths are expansive by nature. Instinctively, when you breathe, you expand. Stillness and silence are the opposite of doing, activity, and speaking and thinking. So we're right away putting ourselves into a state of expansion with these preliminary steps. So let's start. We're going to take 3 deep breaths, followed by 15 seconds of absolute stillness and silence. Don't move a muscle. It's important. And you'll notice that when you are completely still, it's different than anything you do the entire day. And you become aware that there is an alternative to constant activity and thinking and worrying and doing. And so you're nudging yourself into a more expanded state with a very simple act of deep breaths, stillness, and silence. So here we go. 3 deep breaths, followed by 15 seconds of absolute stillness and silence, but of course continue to breathe. Here we go. "15 seconds, absolute stillness, silence. Take a deep breath. And just take a moment to experience, to pay attention to what just happened. What you just did is you move the dial. If this is total contraction and this is total expansion and you are highly contracted, which most of us are, most of the day, most of our lives, even at night when we're dreaming and sleeping, is you've nudged yourself into a more expanded state, ever so slightly. And the thing that I discovered about this technique is because you can't contract and expand at the same time, you can't move this way and that way at the same time, you can't make a fist and release a fist at the same time, even the smallest amount of expansion is helpful in moving you towards this expanded state. Once you've started to expand, you have effectively, if even for a moment, stopped contracting. So what we're doing here with this technique is we are infusing our very being, our physical, spiritual, emotional self with injections of, you might say, expansion. And we're nudging ourselves into a more completely expanded state. When you're completely expanded, you are in complete peace. You are accepting. You are calm. You are still. You are silent. You are empty. You are free. So you've begun the process. So let's continue. Now we're going to do 5 deep breaths. We're going to expand even further, followed by 30 seconds of absolute stillness and silence. Same thing, just a little bit more. We're expanding even further. And that's what we're doing. We're nudging ourselves along. 5 deep breaths. Here we go. "30 seconds, absolute stillness and silence. Don't move a muscle. Experience what it is to do absolutely nothing. 30 seconds. Deep breath. And take a moment and note the changes. How do you feel different? You've moved into a slightly more expanded state. It may be a little, it may be a lot, but something's changed. How do you feel different? For myself, I feel more still. I feel more quiet. I don't feel in such a rush to speak. The experience of compulsion has dissipated. I'm coming into a state where just to be, just to sit and be still and do nothing, is totally legitimate. If you're anything like me, when I start a session, anytime I do a scanning session, which this is, I'm filled with thoughts and ideas and worries and concerns. It's very difficult for me to get myself to stop. So this again is a way of jump-starting the expansive process. So let's continue. 7 deep breaths, followed by a full minute of absolute stillness and silence. 7 deep breaths, full minute of stillness and silence. And again, if you're like me, this may be the first time in the past 24 hours you've actually stopped and sat still or stopped thinking or doing. So just note, or begin to note in the practice of scanning, when you are in a contracted state and when you are in a more expanded state, and pay attention to how much of your day is in a state of contraction and how much in a state of expansion. You'll want to bring more expansion into your life again so that you are contraction, expansion, balanced. You have both. 7 deep breaths, full minute, absolute stillness and silence. Here we go. 2 more. 60 seconds. Absolute stillness and silence, but continue to breathe. Deep breath. And again, just take a moment to note the changes as you shift from a contracted state to a more expanded state. The changes can be very slight. It doesn't matter. As I mentioned earlier, this is called the incremental release of muscular tension. This process is incremental. Incremental, even the smallest amount. Contraction, once you start expanding, even if it's the slightest amount, you've stopped contracting. It's very important to recognize that. Even the ability to sit more comfortably in silence and do nothing is indication that you have expanded when you are able to be still. Now, I just want to make a slight note before we go into what I call the nuts and bolts of the technique, which is the incremental release of muscular tension. There's a lot going on in the world right now. And our minds are very active. We're thinking about what's happening. We're thinking, what should we do? What can we do? What are my choices? How do I feel about what's happening? There's a lot of contraction going on. We're experiencing very powerful events in the world. And out of fear, which is generally what motivates contraction, we are going into a state of hyper thought, hyper worry, hyper concern. We are definitely moving into a more extremely contracted state. When you are completely contracted, you are imploded. You are, in fact, solid. Nothing can penetrate. You are impermeable, and it makes it all the more difficult to interact and merge with the world. 2 contracted objects slam against each other. So, as effective as you may feel contraction is, And it is. It's how we solve problems. It's how we think. It's how we do. When you are overly contracted, it is counterproductive. You lose your effectiveness. You lose your ability to act effectively in the world because you have become so contracted that you've cut yourself off from a consciousness, an awareness with the world, an ability to interact with the world. When you are expanded, you can merge with the world more effectively. So, expansion allows you to reclaim your clarity, your effectiveness in the world, because to be overly contracted is to lose your effectiveness. The reason we need balance is because we need both. We need to also expand. So in those moments when you are thinking too much, worrying too much, obsessed with what steps you must now take in relation to what's happening in the world, I recommend that you take a moment to scan, to expand in whatever form that may take, which will bring you greater clarity, it will bring you more calm, more peace of mind, which will then allow you to more effectively deal with the actual problems you face in the world. So there may be a sense sometimes that as you expand, you're letting go. You're not dealing with the problem that you need to deal with. You're not thinking about it anymore, and you feel, I must continue to think about it. I must continue to do. Well, yes, you must come back to it, but it is completely legitimate and effective to take a moment to release it all, to let it all go, to clear your mind, to expand, to have clarity so that you can see more effectively and better solve those problems you face. So it's hard to convince yourself sometimes that letting go and doing nothing is an effective means of achieving anything, because so much of what we do in life is done through contraction, doing, thinking, saying, posting, writing, speaking. But what I've come to understand through this technique, and it may work for you or not, is that unless we are balanced, unless we also have achieved a deep state of expansion, we will begin to lose our effectiveness. It can become counterproductive. Expansion, in my mind, is equally valid and important as contraction. So it's hard to wrap your mind around that sometimes. Someone says, here's a problem. What should I do? Well, how about do nothing? What do you mean do nothing? Well, how about just take 2 minutes and do nothing? Clear your head. Calm yourself. Come to a place where you can effectively deal with that problem. So what you're doing through scanning is you're training yourself. You're reminding yourself of the importance of balance. And at those times when you feel overly contracted, having a technique which will expand you and bring you back into balance. So that's all we're doing. So we've done the preliminary phase of scanning, deep breaths, stillness and silence. Now we move into what I call the nuts and bolts, the heart of this technique, which is the incremental release of muscular tension. Basically, what I discovered through this technique is that the muscles can be a guide. It's hard to think yourself out of a problem sometimes because thinking is a contraction, and contracting to stop contracting is self-defeating. What I found that if you use the muscles as a guide, if you can release muscular tension, the muscles will guide your body into a more expanded state. As you release tension or expand, contraction, expansion, the sensation of expansion begins to infuse your body, take over your body. Your body begins to understand that it is time to expand and let go. This, in turn, affects your mind, a muscle of sort, which holds on tight to obsessive thoughts, worries, concerns. It releases those thoughts, worries, concerns, and they float away, and you find yourself in a completely expanded state. So we are using the muscles as a guide. Any issue you're having, any problem you're having when you are overly contracted, if you focus on just releasing muscular tension, initially you may feel a tremendous amount of resistance. You want to stay in a contracted state. That's your safe place. But as you begin to let go, you'll notice that everything becomes calmer, clearer, quieter, more still, more aware. But you have to trust to let the muscles be your guide. It's not a thinking process, scanning. It's a physical process. So let's squeeze our hands together. Tight, tight, tight. That's contraction. On my count, let go. 3, 2, 1, release. Take a deep breath. So you've just released muscular tension. Incremental. Contraction, expansion. Now I do this because you need to start building a consciousness with this technique of the difference between contraction and expansion. And the muscles are the perfect metaphor for those two states. Contraction, squeeze, expansion, let go. These are the two forces of life. That's all we do is contract and expand all day long. Contract and expand. So you're heightening your awareness of the basic fundamental building blocks of our existence. Contraction, expansion. So now you see what they are. So now you can choose, well, which one do I want to do? Do I want to contract? Do I want to expand? And by that, you're now aware that you have control. you can move yourself into a more expanded state. How? By simply letting go. Letting go. Muscular tension. Now people say, well, why not just let go of your thoughts? Why not just meditate? Why not just quiet your mind? Well, as we all know, that's very, very difficult. Very difficult. And if you know how to do that, that's fantastic. What I discovered for myself is that my mind would never stop, would never settle down. I had to find another way, another avenue, a trick, if you will, to guide my mind to a clearer state. And I discovered that when I concentrated fully on releasing muscular tension over a period of time, this calmed my mind because it brought my entire being into a more expanded state. So now you know the difference between the two. We're going to work our way through the body, which is why I call it scanning. We're scanning the body for pockets of muscular tension, and we're going to incrementally release muscular tension in those areas. We're going to do what I call cycling through the body. We're going to go through the body once, then we're going to do it again. Then we're going to do it again, and you keep repeating that. You can do it 5 minutes, you can do it 15 minutes, you can do it an hour. But you'll notice you start to move the dial. And the longer you stay with it, the more expanded you become. And you will discover through your own experimentation what that feels like. And through discipline and practice, you'll be able to stay with it longer and longer and longer until one day you'll realize I have the ability to move myself into an expanded state. So you don't have to be in a panic when you're feeling contracted or concerned or worrying. You say, I have a way to bring myself out of this. And you'll begin to recognize when you're overly contracted and know that now's the time to expand. Now, for a lot of people, they'll take a drink, they'll have a shot, they'll have a beer, they'll smoke a joint. That's a chemical expansion. That's valid if it works for you. Anything that works for you is fine. But I'm suggesting that when you are dependent on an external component, an external expansive processes like alcohol or drugs, it defeats the purpose because you feel dependent and your focus becomes on getting hold of that beer, that joint, and that's a contractive thing. So when you can do it yourself, you've already begun to move yourself into a more expanded state. So we're going to start with zone 1. Break the body into zones, the face. On my count, I want you to release all the muscular tension you can in your face. 3, 2, 1, and release. Very important that you pay attention to how that felt. From this, 3, 2, 1, to this. Very important. That sensation of muscular release, that, see my shoulders dropped? That's scanning. That's scanning. That sensation is scanning. And what you want to do is practice that, creating that sensation over and over and over again until you come to a place where you can relax your body. And when you relax the muscles, the mind will follow. The face, 3, 2, 1, and release. And if I had to describe it, I'd say it was a drooping sensation. The muscles are holding, they're contracted. When you release, they drop. Nothing's holding them up. They're just hanging off your body like drapes. Again, the face, 3, 2, 1, and release. And as I always say, the face is a good way to start because you can look in the mirror and you can actually see the change. 3, 2, 1, and release. You feel dumb like that. So you've begun. Zone 2 is the top of the head. 3, 2, 1, and release. And visualization helps in some of these areas because it's difficult sometimes to imagine or focus on what it feels like to release muscles. We're so unfamiliar with the process. So I always imagine it as if someone broke an egg on top of my head and I just feel the muscles just dripping down the side of my head. The top of the head, 3, 2, 1, and release. And you'll feel a sort of a weightiness, a sort of a slackening. Maybe your brow will unfurrow. If these changes are slight, that's fine. Again, it's the incremental release of muscular tension. Even the slightest change is effective towards moving the dial towards an expanded state. Top of the head, 3, 2, 1, and release. Now you've done the face, 3, 2, 1, and the top of the head, 3, 2, 1, and so you've begun. Zone 3 is the back of the head, 3, 2, 1, and release. And I always imagine there's like a rubber band, a wide rubber band stretched across the back of my head, and when I release it, the band is slackened, and that tension just goes away. The back of the head, 3, 2, 1, and release. Now you're up against two things when you scan. You're up against the muscles themselves, which habitually want to hold on, and they've been trained to do that over decades of your life through habit. Contracting a muscle is a way to protect yourself. Since we go around in a good part of our lives in a state of fear these days, then you walk around in a naturally contracted state. So you're going to face the resistance of the muscles themselves, which are instinctively protecting you, and you're going to face the resistance of your own mind, which habitually has been conditioned to believe that only through contraction can I achieve, only through contraction can I be safe, only through contraction can I exist. So you're going to experience resistance. And people say, I'm experiencing resistance. I can't do it. Well, resistance is like discovering gold in this process. Because when you find resistance, it's like you've discovered your deeper sense of contraction. So you're up against the very thing you're trying to counteract. So resistance is a sign that, wow, I'm really contracted. Keep going. Keep going. You're having a little bit of a debate with yourself. Part of you saying, no, keep contracted. And the other part of you saying, no, we're going to let that go. And you're strengthening the part of you that says, let go. Back of the head, 3, 2, 1, and release. Zone 4 is the neck, 3, 2, 1, and release. And I move through these fairly quickly in these half-hour sessions just to touch base on the main points of the technique. But when you're practicing on your own, take as much time as you like. You can spend a half an hour on the neck. You will customize this technique to your body. Your body is having a completely unique experience from mine. My belief is that we share, all of us, certain similarities in terms of the way our bodies work. But for you, discover how this process works for you. Zone 5 is the shoulders. Let them drop. 3, 2, 1, and release. Deep breath. And frequently in the practice of this technique, you'll find yourself wanting to take a deep breath. That's your body's way of expanding, releasing. We tend not to breathe enough in our overly contracted state. So when the body feels it's an opportunity to breathe because it's begun to relax and open up, it will say, now, take a breath now. Thank you. It's as if you've been swimming underwater, holding your breath, and now you're coming to the surface and there's oxygen available to you and you're going, I want that because I've been in a depleted state. A lot of times panic and fear and anxiety come from being in a contracted state, not breathing enough, and literally feeling as though you're dying. You're not breathing. Your body is sending you a signal, you're dying. I need more oxygen. You're tightening up, you're closing down. And that anxiety, that discomfort is literally your body in a panic that it's not getting what it needs. So a deep breath, whenever you feel that, is always effective. If you learn nothing else from these sessions but that, take a deep breath every so often. You'll have gone a long way towards expansion. Zone 5, again, the shoulders, 3, 2, 1, let them drop. And again, the shoulders, 3, 2, 1, let them drop. Deep breath. Zone 6 is the chest, the front of the waist, what I call the plate of armor. We protect ourselves emotionally. 3, 2, 1, let it go. And again, zone 6, 3, 2, 1, and release. A lot of the resistance to this technique is that it tends to make us feel vulnerable. As you drop your muscular guard, as you drop your emotional guard, you feel exposed. You feel vulnerable and you tend to want to cover up again and contract. But you have to talk yourself through this process sometimes and say, I'm sitting in a room, I'm in a chair, there's no danger, nothing's going to happen to me. The worst thing that can happen is that I'll start to feel. Feelings are held and buried when you are contracted. As you release and open up and expand, those feelings emerge. They never go away, feelings. You just bury them. So feelings you may have hidden for a long time may suddenly start to emerge. That can feel scary and frightening. Perhaps you don't want to feel, which is completely understandable. It can be unsettling. But if you can allow those feelings to emerge, then they are free and they won't bother you anymore. So again, you'll feel resistance. You'll feel fear. You feel all sorts of feelings, but you're changing your complete state of being. Contracted state is one of protectiveness, fear, holding, suppressing. As you change that to an expanded state of openness, release, vulnerability, you may feel uncomfortable. But it's actually bringing you into that state of balance, and ultimately you will feel much, much better. Zone 7 is down the back and into the pelvis. 3, 2, 1, and release. And if you can come up with words that help you describe this process of expansion and release, then do. For me, I always think of the muscles as clenched. I unclench the pelvis. 3, 2, 1, and release. And if you felt that release, you've expanded. Again, down the back, into the pelvis. 3, 2, 1, and release. Other associated feelings with expansion are tingling. As the muscles begin to relax, the blood is allowed to flow more freely into those areas. You feel a warming, perhaps, a tingling as the blood enters the capillaries and veins and arteries that have been cut off by your contracted state. Everything starts to become alive. In an expanded state, your body is more able to heal itself. There's greater circulation. More oxygen is flowing through your system. So again, always note the changes. Whatever changes you feel, note them, because you're discovering, you're learning, you're studying about what it is to expand. And the more you study it, the more you practice it, the better you will get at it, and the more readily you can move yourself into that state. Until eventually, when you practice this technique for hours and hours, you will have a certain confidence, a certain calm in your life, because no matter how overly contracted you feel, you will know within you that it may be challenging, but you can save yourself from that overly contracted state. You have a technique for bringing you into a more expanded or balanced state where you feel better, can think more clearly. Zone 8, the final zone, down the legs, across the knees, and into the feet. Relax the feet, 3, 2, 1, and release. If this is unfamiliar, if you've never focused on or releasing the muscular tension in various parts of your body, that's totally fine. You're just starting. You will get better and better and better at it. And you're going to want to do it. Once you recognize how good it feels, you're going to want to do it. The only opponent you have in this process is yourself. If you can move yourself past your own resistance, you will achieve a state of expansion. The feet, 3, 2, 1, and release. So it's been about a half an hour. I keep these sessions to about a half an hour. The purpose of these sessions is merely to reinforce or remind anyone who's interested in the technique exactly how it works and what the basic steps are. I recommend you take as much time as you can. I also recommend you keep a log of how many hours you do it, minutes, whatever, as a way of motivating you. The more time you put into it, the more you will get out of it. You know, a basic component of this technique is deciding to practice the technique. When you have decided to expand, you have changed your life. When you have decided that it's important to let go, when you have decided that it's important to do nothing, when you have decided that it's important to take a moment and be still, you have begun expanding. That mere decision is an expansive decision, and you have begun the process of infusing your life with expansion. Not to take over your life. You don't want to be, a lump of clay, with no purpose. A completely expanded state is a state of nothingness. But of course, we live on this earth. We have jobs, we have relationships, we write books, we build buildings, we do. That's life. But you do want to achieve balance. And 9 times out of 10, most of us are overly contracted, and what we need to feel happy, to feel calm, to feel better, is to expand. So all we're doing with this technique is infusing ourselves with expansion so that we can bring ourselves into a state of balance. And so that you have that tool available to you as a part of your life, just as much as anything you do to make you feel good or make you feel better. That's all this is. It's one way to achieve balance. Of course, there's a million ways to do that. This is the way I discovered for myself. I think it's valid. I didn't invent it. I discovered it because I noticed how my body worked. And I'm basically sharing it to say, hey, look, this might work for you. If it does, I'm thrilled. Okay, so that's it. It is Monday, October 9th again. It's about 5:30. And Sqanning again is the incremental release of muscular tension to achieve a deep state of physical, emotional, and mental calm. Now, we all go back to the world and contract and do and think and achieve what we need to achieve as we face it, but hopefully with more clarity, with more calm, and with more joy. Have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.